Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into some seriously cool science today, all about life cycles. You've been digging into how plants and animals make more of themselves, and we've got some fascinating stuff to explore.
Yeah, we're going to unpack these cycles in plants and animals materials, especially focusing on that TLG PDF document. It's like a cheat sheet for understanding how life keeps going.
Exactly. And don't worry, we'll make it way more fun than just reading a textbook.
Yeah.
We're going to break down these key concepts like you're a pro, ready to tackle primary five sign.
Right, because we're talking about the secrets behind literally every plant and animal on Earth.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Your material mentions cells as the building blocks of life. It's like saying everything that's alive is made of these tiny pieces. But what does that even mean?
Well, imagine a Lego castle, right? But instead of those plastic blocks, it's made of millions and millions of microscopic living units. And those are cells. Each one is like its own little city, super busy doing specific jobs to keep the whole thing alive.
Whoa, so you're saying our bodies are like these gigantic, organized Lego castles made of cells. That's kind of blowing my mind right now.
It is pretty amazing, right? And your source material points out that there are a ton of different types of cells, each one with its own shape and function. Just like in a city, you've got different workers with different jobs. So like we have blood cells zipping around like delivery trucks.
Oh, I get it. So there's blood cells and what else?
Well, we've got skin cells. They're kind of like the protective walls, right? And then brain cells, those are sending signals like a super fast internet network.
So it's not just that we're made of cells, but that all these different types are working together. I'm starting to see how complex this whole thing is, but I remember thinking that when we grow up, it's just our cells getting bigger, like slowing up a balloon. Is that actually how it works?
Not really, no. Your material clears that up, actually. It's not that they inflate, it's that we get more of them. As we grow, cells divide and multiply, so it's like adding more and more building blocks to our bodies. That's how we get bigger and more complex over time.
So it's more like adding more Legos to the castle instead of just stretching the ones we already have. Okay, that makes sense. But hold on, these cells are so tiny. How do we even know they're there?
Well, that's where the microscope comes in. Your textbook mentions this. They're essential tools for seeing this whole world of cells. It's like a super-powered magnifying glass, you know? It allows us to see things that are way too small for our eyes to see on their own.
Okay, that makes sense. Microscopes are how we know they even exist. But now I have another question. If we're all just a bunch of cells, why do living things even bother to reproduce? What's the point of making more?
That's a great question. It gets right to the heart of life itself. Your material explains that living things reproduce to ensure the continuity of their kind, which basically means keeping the cycle of life going, generation after generation. Imagine if there weren't any new baby animals or plants.
Oh, that would be a pretty sad and empty world. No puppies, no kittens, no little seedlings popping up. I get it. Reproduction is pretty crucial for keeping life going.
Exactly. And your material uses this real-world example you might find interesting. It talks about giant pandas, specifically Lele, Gia, and Kai from the Singapore Zoo. They were part of a breeding program because pandas have a really hard time reproducing in captivity.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It was a really big deal when those panda cubs were born.
Yeah.
So it's not just about individual animals having babies. It's about making sure there are enough of them to keep the whole species going.
Right. Reproduction is key for keeping healthy populations of all living things, whether it's pandas, plants, or us. Your material even mentions that Singapore is facing some challenges because birth rates are declining, which could have huge impacts down the road.
Wow, so this whole continuity thing, it applies to whole countries and species, not just individual families. That's pretty deep stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered cells as the building blocks and reproduction as the engine that keeps the cycle going. But what about all those traits that we get from our parents? How does that even work?
That's where we get into the fascinating world of heredity, how characteristics are passed down through generations. Your material states many characteristics of an organism are passed on from parents to offspring. It's like, think about it. Why do you have your mom's eyes? Or your dad's hair color?
Yeah, I've always wondered about that. It's like we're a mix of our parents, but also totally unique.
Exactly. And your material uses this cool analogy called the sparkle model to help explain this. It's a great way to visualize how characteristics are passed on. So imagine each parent is a set of colorful sparkle building blocks. Each block represents a different trait.
Okay, I'm picturing it. So each parent has their own set of sparkle blocks. Then what?
Well, when they reproduce, they each contribute some of their blocks to their offspring, which creates this brand new combination. So you might get your dad's block for brown eyes, your mom's block for curly hair, and boom, you've got your unique combination of traits.
Oh, that's such a cool way to think about it. But hold on. I always thought we inherited things from either our mom or our dad, like a simple choice between two options. Is that wrong?
It's actually a little more complicated than that. Your material points this out. It's not a matter of picking one or the other. The characteristics we get are a result of how the genetic information from both parents interacts. It's like those sparkle blocks can blend and influence each other, which makes even more variety.
So even though I might have my mom's brown eyes, there's still some hidden blue eye information from my dad tucked away in my genes.
Exactly. And that mix of genetic material is what makes every single organism totally unique.
Wow, this is making me see families in a whole new way. Okay, so we've got cells, this idea of continuity, and now this incredible mixing of characteristics through reproduction. I think it's time to zoom in on humans specifically, get into the nitty-gritty.
Great idea. Your material goes on to focus on the process of sexual reproduction in humans, especially this thing called fertilization. It's a pretty big deal.
Okay, I'm ready for the details. What exactly is fertilization? I know it involves a sperm and an egg, but then things get a little fuzzy for me.
Well, you got the key players right. The sperm from the father and the egg from the mother have a very important meeting. And when they fuse together, boom, that's fertilization. It creates this single cell called a zygote. And that's the very beginning of a new human life.
Wow, so that tiny zygote cell is where it all starts. But wait, does that mean a baby just pops out right away?
Not quite. The source explains that the zygote doesn't just magically appear fully formed. It needs time and the right environment to grow and develop. It's kind of like planting a seed, right? It doesn't instantly become a flower. It needs time, nutrients, the right conditions to sprout and grow.
So where does this amazing growth happen? I know a lot of people say the baby grows in the stomach. Is that true?
That's a common misconception, and your material is careful to debunk it. The stomach is for digesting food, not for growing babies. The real star here is the womb, this special organ designed to nourish and protect the developing baby.
Ah, okay, that makes way more sense. So it's like the womb is this high-tech baby-growing pod. But how long does it actually take for this tiny zygote to become a full-fledged baby?
Well, the source mentions that the gestation period, which is the time it takes for the baby to develop in the womb, is about 9 months for humans.
9 months. That's like waiting for summer vacation. So what exactly is happening during those 9 months?
It's a pretty incredible transformation. The zygote develops into an embryo and then a fetus. It's like watching this tiny blueprint come to life, all the organs and body systems slowly taking shape.
Amazing. Does the source go into detail about all the stages of fetal development?
Not for this level. Right now, we're just focusing on understanding the basic idea of fertilization and who the key players are. We'll leave those intricate details of fetal development for another deep dive.
Okay, that makes sense. So humans have this whole intricate dance of cells and genes to create new life. But now I'm curious about how plants do it. I'm guessing it's totally different, right?
You're right. It is different, but equally remarkable. Your SORC material takes us into the world of plant reproduction, specifically focusing on flowering plants. And guess what? It all starts with something you're probably pretty familiar with. Flowers?
Flowers. I love them. They're so pretty. But I never really thought of them as being part of reproduction.
Well, flowers are basically like the plant's reproductive organs. They have all the parts needed for making seeds, which are like plant babies. Your source material breaks it all down, starting with pollination. It's like plant matchmaking.
Plant matchmaking. Okay, I need to hear more about this. How do plants find their perfect match?
It all starts with pollen, which contains the male reproductive cells of the plant. So pollination is the process of moving this pollen from the anther, which is the male part of the flower, to the stigma, which is the female part. And guess what plays a big role in this transfer?
Well, I guess it has something to do with those busy bees I always see buzzing around flowers.
You got it. Bees, along with other insects, birds, and even the wind, they all act as pollinators. They help carry the pollen from one flower to another, letting the plants mix and match their genetic material.
So those colorful petals and sweet scents, those aren't just for show. It's like a clever invitation for the pollinators to come and help with the plant's love life. What about wind pollination? How does that work?
Wind-pollinated flowers are usually less flashy. They don't need to attract pollinators with bright colors or smells. Instead, they just make a ton of lightweight pollen that can be easily carried by the wind.
Fascinating. So the pollen gets delivered to the stigma. What happens next?
That's where the real magic happens. Once the pollen reaches the stigma, it travels down to the ovary, where the female reproductive cells are waiting. Just like in humans, the male and female cells fuse together, and that's what we call fertilization.
So fertilization is like this big meeting point for both plants and humans, bringing those reproductive cells together. But what happens after fertilization in a plant? Do they get a baby bump like humans?
Not a baby bump exactly, but they do have something pretty amazing. Fertilization in plants leads to the development of seeds, which are like these tiny packages of potential just waiting to grow into new plants.
Oh, so that's where seeds come from. It's all making sense now. But seeds are so small and delicate, how do they actually get planted to grow into new plants?
Well, that's where seed dispersal comes in. It's basically the plant's way of spreading its seeds to new areas, giving them a chance to sprout and grow without having to compete with the parent plant.
That makes sense. Plants can't walk around and plant their own seeds like we can, so how do they manage to spread them far and wide?
Plants have come up with some seriously creative ways to disperse their seeds. Some rely on the wind to carry their seeds, like those fluffy dandelion seeds you see floating around. Others actually hitch a ride on animals, using little hooks or sticky surfaces to cling to fur or feathers. And some even use water currents to travel to new locations.
Wow. Plants are like expert engineers. It's like they've figured out how to use nature's delivery service to get those seeds out there. But once a seed lands in a new spot, what makes it actually start growing?
That process is called germination. It's the moment that a seed sprouts and begins to grow into a new plant.
So it needs things like soil, sunlight, all that good stuff that plants love.
You're on the right track. Your material highlights 3 key conditions for germination: water, oxygen, and warmth. Think of it like a recipe for plant growth. You need all the right ingredients for that seed to wake up and start growing.
Interesting. I always thought light was essential for germination too.
That's actually a common misconception. While light is super important for photosynthesis, which is how plants make food, it's not actually needed for that initial sprouting stage. It's all about water, oxygen, and warmth to kick things off.
Wow, this is full of surprises. I'm learning so much about how both humans and plants make new life. But they seem like such different processes. Are there any connections between them at all?
That's a fantastic question, and it leads us to a key takeaway from your material. It emphasizes that even with all the differences in their parts and methods, both humans and flowering plants rely on the same fundamental process: fertilization. It's the big meeting point for the male and female reproductive cells, the spark that ignites the creation of new life.
That's amazing. Even though humans and plants look and act so differently, we share this common ground when it comes to making new life. It's like this hidden connection between all living things.
Exactly, and that's something your material really drives home. It highlights the common threads in nature, showing us that even seemingly different life forms often share these really fundamental processes.
I'm starting to get the big picture here. We've gone from tiny cells to giant pandas to these incredible ways both humans and plants reproduce. This is way more interesting than I thought it would be.
It's all about understanding this amazing story of life and how it just keeps going generation after generation.
Well, I'm definitely hooked. We've covered so much ground already. Cells, continuity, the passing of characteristics, human reproduction, and the incredible world of flowering plants. I'm excited to see what other insights we uncover as we keep going with this deep dive. Okay, I'm still thinking about all that amazing information about how plants and humans reproduce. It's incredible to think about these tiny processes happening all around us, creating new life.
It really is remarkable. But sometimes it's helpful to address some of the common misconceptions that people have about reproduction. Sometimes we have these old ideas stuck in our heads that can actually make it harder to understand the real science.
Oh, totally. Like, I definitely believed that whole the stork delivers babies thing when I was a kid. What other misconceptions do people have about reproduction?
Well, we talked about the idea that cells just get bigger when we grow, right? But your material really stresses that it's not about size, it's about the sheer number of cells. Growth actually happens through cell division, creating more and more cells to build a bigger and more complex organism. It's like that Lego castle analogy again, building it brick by brick.
Right. More bricks, not bigger bricks. What about the way we inherit traits from our parents? Are there any misconceptions there?
Definitely. Some people think that we get specific traits only from our mother or father. Like if you have your dad's blue eyes, some people might think that means you didn't get any eye color genes from your mom. But remember that sparkle model. It's all about the combination of genes from both parents and how they interact.
Oh, right. Those sparkle blocks can blend and influence each other in really cool ways. So even though I might have my mom's curly hair, there could still be some hidden straight hair information from my dad in my genes.
Exactly. It's not a simple either kind of thing. Your material makes that really clear. The characteristics that we end up with are the result of this complex interplay between the genetic information that we get from both parents.
It's like those genes are doing their own little dance, figuring out how to express themselves in this totally unique way. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about some human-specific misconceptions. I remember as a kid thinking that babies grew in the stomach. Is that something a lot of people get wrong?
Yeah, that's a classic misconception. It probably comes from the fact that when women are pregnant, their bellies get bigger. But your textbook very clearly explains that the stomach is for digesting food, not for growing babies. The womb is where all that development happens.
The womb, the ultimate baby-growing haven.
It's important to set the record straight on that one for sure. Are there any other misconceptions about human reproduction that we should talk about?
Well, another one is this idea that traits are passed down equally from both parents, like this perfect 50-50 split. But while we inherit half of our genetic material from each parent, how those genes actually express themselves can be a bit more complex than that. There are all sorts of factors that can influence which traits we end up with.
It's not always a simple equation. Genetics can be full of surprises. What about plant reproduction? Are there any common misconceptions there? Oh, definitely. One that comes up a lot is this idea that all flowering plants have those big, bright, colorful flowers that we're used to seeing. But remember, not all plants need insects or animals to help them with pollination. Some use the wind to spread their pollen, and those flowers tend to be a lot less showy.
That makes sense. If you don't need to attract a bee or a butterfly, you don't need to put on a big fancy flower show. Any other plant misconceptions that we should debunk?
Another one is that the way a plant is pollinated always matches how it spreads its seeds. But that's not always true. You could have a flower that's pollinated by bees, but then relies on the wind to spread its seeds. It's all about using the most effective strategy for each part of the process.
So there's more flexibility in these processes than I realize. Plants are pretty adaptable. What about germination? Any misconceptions about that crucial first step in a plant's life?
Oh, yeah. One big one is that people think light is essential for germination. But remember, your textbook points out that it's actually not. While light is really important for photosynthesis, which is how plants make their food, it's not needed for the initial sprouting process. What seeds really need is water, oxygen, and warmth to get things going.
So interesting how these misconceptions can really stick with us, even when the science is pretty clear. So how can we help kids, and maybe even some adults, get a more accurate understanding of reproduction?
I think visuals in hands-on activities are really key. Like that sparkle model, that's a fantastic way to help kids picture how traits get passed down. And for plant reproduction, I think there's nothing better than actually dissecting a flower and seeing those reproductive parts up close.
Totally. Making science hands-on and relatable is so important, especially for younger kids. What about connecting these concepts to the bigger picture of life on Earth?
Oh, absolutely. Understanding reproduction can help us address all sorts of important issues. For instance, we can talk about how declining birth rates in certain countries can impact their future, or how introducing a new plant species into an ecosystem can change the whole thing.
Right, so learning about how life creates more life can actually help us make better decisions about our world. That's pretty powerful.
It really is. And it all starts with understanding those basic concepts that we've been discussing. Cells, continuity, heredity, the processes of both plant and human reproduction, it's all connected.
I'm really glad we did this deep dive together. It's amazing how much we've learned from your cycles and plants and animals material. But of course, there's always more to explore, right?
Oh, absolutely. The world of science is full of mysteries just waiting to be discovered. And who knows, maybe some of the kids listening to this will be the ones who make those next big breakthroughs.
I have no doubt about it. Well, for all those budding scientists out there, remember that curiosity is your superpower. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never lose that sense of wonder about the world around you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the incredible world of reproduction.
Wow, we've really gone deep into this whole world of reproduction. From those tiny cells to giant pandas, it's mind-blowing to see how life finds a way to create more life. Whether it's a plant sending its seeds out on the wind or a human family welcoming a new baby.
Yeah, it really is a testament to the power and resilience of nature, isn't it? And it makes you realize that even with all we've learned, there's still so much more to discover about the mysteries of how life keeps going.
That's what's so cool about science. There are always more questions to ask and new things to figure out. Speaking of which, your material mentions this really fascinating idea that fertilization is actually similar in both flowering plants and humans. It's like this hidden connection between these two totally different worlds.
It is, Despite all those obvious differences in their reproductive parts and their strategies, both humans and flowering plants rely on this fundamental process of a male and female reproductive cell meeting to create new life. It highlights this core principle of biology that life builds on these common themes, even across huge differences.
It's like a secret handshake between all living things. And it makes you wonder about all the other connections out there just waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely. That's why it's so crucial for young learners, like the ones listening, to keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never lose that sense of wonder.
You're so right. I know this deep dive has definitely sparked my curiosity, and I bet it's done the same for our listeners. So, for all those primary 5 students out there who are starting their science journey, what's one key takeaway you hope they'll remember from all this exploration of reproduction?
I think it would be that reproduction is so much more than just making babies. It's really about ensuring the continuity of life itself, passing down those characteristics from one generation to the next and maintaining the incredible diversity of life we have on Earth.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. And it ties back to all those key concepts we've been talking about. Cells being the building blocks of life, the importance of reproduction for the survival of species, and those fascinating ways traits are passed down through generations.
It all comes together to tell this incredible story of life, a story that's still being written every single day.
Well said. We've covered so much in this deep dive. I hope everyone listening has enjoyed the journey as much as we have.
It's been a pleasure exploring these fascinating concepts with you.
And to all our listeners out there, remember that learning about science is an adventure that never really ends. Keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and never stop discovering the wonders of the world all around you. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.